Hello, and welcome to Kickstart, a show profiling successful startups and the stories behind their founders. Today, I'm joined with Steve Richard of ExecVision. Hi, Steve. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Patrick.
Yeah, so tell me, sales is sort of a blue collar, gritty type thing. How did you get to become such an expert in sales?
Wow. Okay. That there's a lot there we can start off with. Um, First of all, actually, my family background is blue collar and gritty. The family business is called Richard Septic Systems in the northwest corner of Connecticut. Like literally, the family business is septic systems and all the jokes that you can imagine, like how's business, shitty, things like that. I'm kind of more of a blue collar person, bring your lunch pail to work kind of guy anyway, from the first place. And sales found me. I didn't find sales, which I think is common. So after I graduated college, I went and tried to get finance jobs on Wall Street. I went to Georgetown. I can't hide it. And pretty much everybody that I went to school with went to Wall Street except for me. I went 0 for 22, and I had 60,000 in school loans to pay off. Yeah, literally, I kept track of it. And it was my lucky number before that, so it sort of became my unlucky number anyway. Yeah. But it was good in a way. And then I said, well, how am I going to pay off my school loans? Someone I knew at Georgetown, his older friend, a couple of years out of school, said, "Yeah, your buddy's good at presentations. Like he should be in sales." So I went to sales interviews. I went 5 for 5. I landed at the corporate executive board, another one of those ones where it's better to be lucky than good. It was like getting an MBA. It was amazing. Yeah. They were acquired by Gartner recently, but just an awesome place to work. And I was originally failing in sales. So I started off my career with 100 what we now call sales development reps that were getting meetings, getting in the door with senior executives, and then handing those off to the closers, the field people that would close them. And I was low on the totem pole. I realized all of my natural inclinations that I thought worked didn't work, and I had to start studying the best practices of the top people. So I saw the 5 top people on the leaderboard. I mean, they literally had a leaderboard on the wall. And I said, those are my 5 best friends. One of those is our CEO and my business partner, David Stillman. He was a natural. I was not a natural. But I ended up by just simply studying what they did and seeing a lot of things that were counterintuitive. And I implemented them. I actually did them. And then I started measuring the results, and my results got better and better and better and better and better. Something simple things like the times a day you were calling. Conventional wisdom is call from 8 to 5. I was calling CIOs. I saw the best people calling at 7 a.m. Yeah. And I would always start calling at 7 a.m. and I would get a meeting before anybody walked in the door. It was stuff like that, or how you phrase things, what you said in the course of a cold call, that I just really studied the best practices, how to even find the right executives in the first place, how to get their direct lines. So anyway, I studied all that and got really good. So from there, started an outsourced appointment setting business where necessity is the mother of invention. And that's called Vorsight. It's a company that still exists 15 years later. So it's a long answer to a short question, but how did you become a sales expert? By doing it. You don't become a sales expert by sitting around and, dreaming about it and thinking about it. Like you got to actually be out there doing it, and the world changes. You got to evolve as it goes on, and you got to love it and study it and read the best books and, buy. Actually, the best way to learn how to sell is to be involved in dysfunctional buying processes. It'll help you a ton. Actually, I got a great book here. I'll pull out of my briefcase. This is an awesome book, Challenger Customer. I love it, by my old colleagues from Corporate Executive Board. Way better than the Challenger sale. But if you either when sales finds you, because 50% of recent college graduates go into sales. That's the statistic from Career Builder. And more than half of those people wash out in the first 12 months and never return to the profession. So when sales finds you, because you got to do something to make a living, you either love it or you don't. And it just so happened that I love it and I'm passionate about it. It's like my favorite thing other than my wife and 4 kids.
So let me ask you a question. You say you love sales, but you were not a natural at it, and it wasn't something that you gravitated to right away. Can you talk about the process of embracing sales, embracing failure, and how, failure can sometimes cripple people, but it can also motivate people? Can you speak to sort of how you handled failure and how you leveraged it to become successful?
I have words for it now, but I didn't then. But it's an interesting question. If you ask any great sales professional or sales leader, tell me about the 5 deals that you lost in your career that really stung. The brain science as to why. The reason is because if you have a very emotionally charged incident in your life, you're much more likely for your short-term memory to write that memory into the long-term memory. So it sticks because in terms of evolutionary biology, we're trying to stay alive. So your brain, when you're sleeping, when you're unconscious, is figuring out what memories should you stick and what shouldn't. So I think the answer to the question is, how do you go about doing it is you're going to fail. I mean, get ready for it. No matter what you're doing, you're going to fail. And there's one of two different things that people do when they fail. They either, roll over, give up, and walk away and try something else. And maybe I'm just too stubborn and boneheaded that I generally stick to it. Actually, funny enough, I really didn't stick to it in things like athletics. There's a lot of people are like, it's a lot of parallels to being a college athlete and all that. I really wish I had, but I didn't. I was never a college athlete or anything like that. I rode crew for a while. I quit. I actually did quit. But when it came to sales for me, I loved it because I said, this will allow me to figure it out the next time around, and I won't make that mistake twice. And, I can still remember they're very, very clear lessons from different deals I've lost throughout my career.
What do you think would be one of the biggest lessons that you learned in those losses? One that what is?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you a couple of them. I'll give you two very, very applicable lessons. So here's lesson one. At one point I was running a sales training firm. And by the way, today our business is ExecVision. It's technology for salespeople to use their calls like a sports coach uses game tape. It's called conversation intelligence. So it makes it really easy to figure out what are the best people doing differently, leveraging AI to determine what that is, and then replicate that for others in the organization, create libraries of best practices, coach, all that. Anyway, I was running a sales training firm at the time, and one of our clients, I'm not going to say who they are, in Northern Virginia, the guys I was talking to, the VPs of sales, were like, yep, we're going to have you come in. We're going to do another session in January. This was October. They said, it's just a formality, but you have to meet our chief revenue officer. We have a new chief revenue officer. You got to meet him, but it's a formality, it's just a meet and greet. Okay. So I go in there as a meet and greet because I drove a great result for them. They were up 50% on pipeline and everybody was happy. Went in there, and it was just an absolute rake you over the coals kind of meeting. There was no sense of humor whatsoever. There was no warmth, and it was just grilling you, and you're kind of like, geez, I mean, I've generated a massive ROI for your company. It's just drilling me and grilling me. So when I left there, he had all this work he wanted us to do in order to earn his business, and we being the dutiful sales reps that we were, we just did it. We buckled down, we stayed late, we nights, the whole thing. And when it was done, we were pretty proud of what we produced. And when we had a chance to present it, he was the most arrogant punk you've ever met in your life. And he just poo-pooed it. He just totally poo-pooed it. And it was really, it hurt. Yeah. I mean, it hurt. And it was like a sucker punch in the gut after we had busted our asses working for free at that point. And we had generated a huge ROI for his company up until that point, and we were being treated like that. But guess what I found out later? Someone from the inside called me, somebody else, and said, this guy, his name I'm not going to say, he's best friends with one of your chief competitors in North Carolina. And when I went on to LinkedIn, I looked at, there was one common connection we had, and it was our arch rival. Turns out they're in the same country club. So the lesson there is, you can't out relationship. And I think it was Andy Miller that I saw, and this was just such a great lesson. He talked about if you're a buyer or have you ever put an animal down? And it's a really sad story, but it's true. If any of you ever put an animal down, had to take him to a vet to get put down, it's really hard to look the animal in the eye. And he said it's the same sort of thing with a buyer, that they can't look you in the eye. And that was the behavior I got from this guy. Is he wouldn't look me in the eye because he knew the whole time he was going to put us down. And he made us jump through all these hoops that were unnecessary. So the first thing is, you can't out relationship. The one with the strongest relationship almost always wins. That's the first thing. And you can easily find that by doing a search on LinkedIn. So every single time, I'm paranoid about being on LinkedIn and looking at who's connected to our prospects. That's a lesson I've learned. Second lesson I've learned is one time I was in a sales cycle where a really well-known sales enablement expert leader who's a good friend got us into a consensus buying group and kind of navigated us through all their challenges, pain points, everything that was going on, why they were shopping. In this case, it was for a social selling program, who the players we were up against. He was coaching me to a T to win this business. And it was the first call that I was ever on with all the different consensus buying group, probably 7 people on the call. So it's a tricky call to manage, a lot of egos, a lot of personalities on the call at the same time, a lot of people who are already in their own right sales enablement experts themselves, sales training experts. And what I did is I kind of followed spin selling kind of to the letter, and I went in and started asking questions about their problems and the implications. And later on, one of the guys that was in the consensus buying group even wrote an article about me, and he was like, man, this guy was really good. He was asking all these really excellent spin selling type of questions, but as a buying group, we were not in the needs recognition part of the process. We were in the evaluation of options part of the process. So the way you sell has to align to where the buyer is in their buying journey. That lesson has stuck with me hardcore, because I lost the $250,000 deal, even though we were priced at maybe 60% of that. We were coming out at like 180 against their 250, and I knew it, but they presented capabilities. They did the thing that most people would say don't do. They basically showed up and throwed up capabilities. They talked probably 90% of the call, but what they did, my competitor did, they outfoxed me that I didn't do, is they aligned what they were doing as a salesperson to where the buyer was in their stage of the buying journey, in this case, evaluation of options. Mm-hmm. So that stuck with me hardcore, is like, if you are misaligned with where the buyer is, if the buyer is still trying to figure out what their need is and you're presenting a solution, you're not aligned with the buyer, and you're not going to get as good of an outcome in the sale as you possibly could. And the same goes with any phase or stage of the buyer's journey. And if you're looking for that, if you're a founder listening to this, or an early stage company sales leader, you just Google customer buying journey or customer decision making process or any of those things, and then click on images, and you'll see 8,000 pictures of various types of funnels. Sometimes they're sideways funnels or vertical funnels, or sometimes they're circles or whatever, but it's pretty easy to find the customer buying predictable phases of customers buying process. And man, if that's not an important lesson, because if you're going to sell to someone, you better understand predictably where they're going to be in their buying process, and you better align to where they are.
Yeah, I think it's easy for salespeople to sort of get stuck in their pitch and stuck in their story instead of responding to the buyer. Do you think that in those moments you were just not conscious of where the buyer was? Do you think there was a disconnect there? Like, where do you think that came from?
I thought they were earlier. I was actually coached that by this other person who was my friend. He was trying to help. I was coached that they were still trying to figure out what their vision looked like and all that stuff. So I was trying to help them better define the problem. And once they had a better defined problem, then I was trying to build their buying vision. Well, as it turns out, the whole buying consensus group was further along in their journey. And it turns out that they were at a point where they had a clear buying vision that had been established. And in this case, it was probably by the other vendor.
Yeah.
And because they established a criteria, I was pitching against criteria where I was pitching dead in many cases. But if I knew the criteria in advance, or if I started the call and said, look, I know you have this need. This is why you have to solve for it. What are your criteria for a solution? And they go, well, it's criteria A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Great. Here's how we can deal with that. Here's how we do A. Here's how we do B. Here's how we do C, D, E, F, G, Q&A, da-da-da-da. What are the next steps? That's the way to conduct that call. It's a very different call flow than the typical discovery and qualification, blah, 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 blah. It's different.
Mm-hmm. Now, at what stage in your professional career were you encountering those? Was this still when you were at CEB, or was this when you had already left?
I had stories like that at corporate executive board. I'd say I have 5 in my career that are kind of like that. And the most recent was, I don't know, only a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago. I mean, if you don't have stories like that, mm-hmm. you ain't going to the plate. Yeah. What my friend Art Sobchak says this, and it's so true. He says, sales is the school you never graduate from. So if you're gonna get up there and you're gonna take swings, then you're going to miss. I don't care who you are. I don't care how much you've studied it. I don't care how much passion you have. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. When you were at CEB and you were trying to schedule meetings and get a hold of all these high-level executives, how receptive are they to essentially a cold call and catching them off guard at 7 a.m.? How would you engage them in conversation where they would instantly look at you as a peer and respect that this random person that's calling me at 7 a.m. has some value that they can offer me.
Wow, you're on a roll. So the first thing is most people are not immediately receptive to a cold call. In other words, people don't answer the phone saying, "Boy, I'm so psyched you called me. What's going on?" But at the same time, people answer their phones knowing it's a cold call or sort of accidentally thinking it's somebody else that's calling. So you have the opportunity to engage. Mm-hmm. So to answer the question, does cold calling work? There's all sorts of data that can prove that cold calling is one of the channels for developing leads. Absolutely 100% works. Is it an easy thing to do when it's an unscheduled, unexpected call? No. No, it's not. Initially, until you understand how to do it, and then it is actually very easy. It's very easy. So now going to your question of how do you do it? Well, the first thing that I learned is how to lead off in the first place with something that's actually pretty controversial, permission to continue, right? So should you say, "Hey, did I catch you at a bad time?" or "Do you have a moment?" or one of those things. So we've tested a lot of that kind of stuff. Another one of our philosophies here at ExecVision is test everything, A/B test everything, so that rather than it being like, "I think this works," or "It's my hunch, I have a feeling it works," instead it's like, I can empirically show with data it does. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we learned when we tested permission to continue is you get it around 75 to 82% of the time, something like that. They'll give you permission to continue, but it was very different based on who was calling. So we like now that our favorite is implied permission to continue. Patrick, I know I'm calling out of the blue, so I'll be brief. And now you move into pre-call research. My understanding is that you are the CEO of blank. Yep, great. Or I understand that you're currently running sales analytics there, or you oversee information security risk. Yep, great. I was doing some homework and I saw that you guys are currently using XYZ system. My understanding is that you're using the dial source dialer, whatever it might be. And then, so that you're using that pre-call research to get the attention of the prospect and move them from something called system 1 to system 2. And then after that, you leverage something called voice of the customer. So talking to other peers of yours, people like you, they're telling me things like A, B, and C. So at corporate executive board, the reason I said you had a pretty savvy question is we learned to use the member voice, which is similar to voice of customer. They were called members, not clients. We learned to use that. So rather than it being like that the CIO was talking to me, it was like the CIO was talking to a peer. And that's what we tried to create in our conversations. This reminds me of a time I talked to the CIO of Heinz. She mentioned blank. How are you thinking about that right now? And then you earn the right to ask questions through this peer dialogue that you create. Yeah. And then finally, you close them for concrete next steps. And you can usually ask some extra questions after you've closed them for next steps. We call them button-up questions. And that's it. I mean, there's your rough blueprint, but there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, when we train our people internally, we spend 2 days on that alone.
Yeah, I can tell just by the way you talk about these conversation analysis that you have a science to it, and I can tell that a lot of it is probably in the ExecVision curriculum. I'm excited to get to that part, but what I find with a lot of successful companies is there's usually an aha moment, right? When you kind of when you identified that there's an untapped need in a market, and or you kind of had this great moment where you realize, I have an awesome idea and I want to see this through. Did you have one of those for either Vorsight or ExecVision?
Yeah, there were two. So actually there were three. The first one was for the outsourced appointment setting business, I should say, Vorsight, where once we were out of corporate executive board, my business partner, David Stillman, and I, it was really actually him originally. He goes, "Boy, salespeople stink at prospecting and they don't have time for it. And we're really good at getting in the door from what we learned when we were at corporate executive board. Let's go do pay for performance appointment setting." So that was the first aha, and it became very easy to get clients for that. So you see a huge market demand. Like, show me any sales leader or CEO on the planet where you say, "Hey, look, we'll get you in the door and you don't pay for us until after the meeting happens." Oh, yeah, sure. How can I get more of those? That was the first epiphany. Second epiphany is along the way, people are saying, teach us. All of your people are these fresh, recent college grads. You're getting them to be better than my people. They produce a higher quality or quantity, but more importantly, a higher quality of appointment than I am or my team is. And my team makes more money and they're older. So come and train us and teach us your best practices. That was the second aha moment. And then the third aha moment is in our own team, and this goes to the technology piece. Actually, it was even kind of before that. When we were doing the sales training, I trained over 200 organizations back in the day with my team, with our team. And what we found is that a lot of times the client, when we left, wouldn't implement what they learned. They never used it, and they forgot it. They literally just forgot it. It's like it never happened. A third of the time they would, and that was when they had good, strong management teams that would reinforce and repetition and practice and use the language and make it part of how they operate. But, if you took that, workbook you got and you just put it on your shelf behind you, it doesn't do you damn good. So we were using the software internally called Team Visibility, and it was leveraging the recordings, allowing us to train and coach people much more effectively, like cutting our onboarding ramp times in half. Because anybody who's trying to learn, who's brand new, they're like, give me real examples. Like, what actually happens in the real world on these calls? Forget about this role play nonsense in the classroom. Like, I want to hear the real deal. Mm-hmm. Everyone leaned into that, and they want to replicate what they hear, which they can. So we were using this software, and we had a chance to buy the company. So we bought the company. That's ExecVision, and now we've got a lot of customers and a lot of people out there that are doing the same thing, leveraging their calls, solving for the problem of this big pile of call recordings nobody ever touches, leveraging artificial intelligence to figure out things like talk versus listen ratios, monologue versus dialogue, keywords and topics, trends within the calls themselves, and then do things like score the calls, share the calls, build a library of the best calls. Because I believe, I still do, having done all that training, that every company already has the best practices for their company, for their sales or their customer support or their customer success or whatever they're doing to create value. They already have the best practices for those calls in their four walls. There are people that are already on those teams that are doing excellent things, but Sally's really good at one thing, and Susie's good at another thing, and Daniel's good at another thing, and Billy's different at another thing. Mm-hmm. So if we can get them all to surface and share the best practices at scale, problems go away. Now we can start replicating what the top performers do differently. And we're seeing that. We see that in our customers where they do things like increase their pipelines by 75% or increase their conversion rates on their closed won conversion rates by 43%, or cut their onboarding ramp times for new hires in half. It actually comes out in the financial metrics of the business.
Yeah, that's incredible. And certainly you can only have those impacts on a business if the management is willing to implement these processes, right? And actually adopt your coaching methodologies. So with ExecVision and your software as a service, I'm kind of curious what the engagement model is like. When you have a new client, how do you engage with them from start to finish, in making sure that they're implementing these coaching strategies, reviewing the cold calls, reviewing their sales pitches, and improving upon it from there?
So we talked about the forgetting curve before and how the brain is wired to purge information, just like a computer. So the short-term memory in your computer is purged or dumped. In your brain, it happens when you're sleeping. So it's an unconscious process when you're sleeping. Yeah. So if you want to overcome the forgetting curve, it takes iteration. It takes a series of events over a period of time, a series of coaching events. So number one, in terms of how you get up and running, well, we do the integration. So ExecVision actually doesn't record anything, but we integrate with online screen sharing tools like Zoom. Like we're on Zoom today, we integrate with Zoom. Dialers, like InsideSales.com, DialSource, Five9, stuff like that, TalkDesk. Phone systems like RingCentral, Vonage, those kinds of things. So we're ingesting all these different recordings from their sources. So once those integrations are done and everything's up and running, we also connect with the CRM so that combines the recordings with the CRM data. So now you can search for all the call recordings from one company, or search for all the calls from one rep, or all the calls that contain these topics versus not. And it's all transcribed. So once their ExecVision instance is up and running, then the fun begins. Now we do things like, number one, we define what does good look like. Every call type has, call it 7 to 10 key behaviors associated with it. And the behaviors there's some commonalities from business to business, but really they're specific for the business. And you want them customized and completely tailored and bespoke to a business and a type of call. So I just did this one of our customers today in Tysons Corner, Virginia. I just got back from there. They've got about 100 sales development reps. and we identified what are the 7 key behaviors. Does the rep blank? Does the rep inquire about so that we can then measure the behaviors if they are happening or if they are not happening. Step 2 after that is once we have a heat map, a skills heat map of your reps, some of these reps are good at these things and bad at these things. Now it becomes a question of change their behavior. Billy is really good at the lead-in. Bobby's really bad at the lead-in. I'm going to have Billy do peer coaching with Bobby until he gets him up to his level. So now we can build coaching plans in the software to say who's going to work with which person over what period of time on what frequency of interval to change the behavior, and then how are we going to measure success. So if we can see that Bobby's lead-in, originally it was like a 1 or 2, and all of a sudden we can move it up to like a 4 over time, bing, that's success. That's exactly what we want to do. And then we'll see his conversion rates go up because he's improved on that skill that he was really lacking in before. So it's this process of identifying what good looks like, generating the coaching plans, and then teaching people how to coach the right way. Most people don't know how to coach. They coach by telling, Patrick. So they'll listen to a call and say, boy, you really should have said this instead. And this is a lesson I borrow from a good friend of mine named Jim Keenan. He's a professional ski instructor and a sales expert in Colorado. And he goes by Keenan. He's an interesting guy. He says he uses this model called observe, describe, prescribe that he learned from being a ski instructor. So when you coach, people can't see themselves. So if you're going to coach someone, you can see them and they can't see themselves. So if you say, hey, Patrick, do you know that right there you just did this? Oh, no, I really didn't know that. So observe, suspend judgment. So don't judge people. This is not Simon Cowell on American Idol. We don't judge people. We just simply tell them what they did, and then we prescribe. So observe, describe, then prescribe. Hey, here's an example of one. A typical thing that salespeople do is they will be doing discovery. They usually do very surface level questions, like the qualification questions, very surface level.
Yeah.
They never get in. They don't get into pain as much as they could, or maybe they find out, what's your biggest challenge? Ooh, good question. And you hear the buyer says their challenge, and they're great. Here, we can solve that challenge. Watch this. We solve that challenge by doing this and this and this and blah, 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 blah. And at the end, the buyer's like, yeah, that's not really what I'm going for here. So we could say, observe. You asked surface level questions. You asked a question about their challenges. You then went and pitched a solution. What could you have done differently to develop the prospect's need first and understand the real impact before you transition to the solution? What would that sound like? And then get the rep to figure it out for themselves and go, boy, I should have asked about what is this costing their business? What's the impact of their business? Who else has this been affecting? How long has it been going on? What have they done to try to fix it? Ask all those additional questions that, Sandler would call the pain funnel. Sandler sales training would call the pain funnel. So there you go. Coaching, observe, describe, prescribe.
That's awesome. So a lot of what you just kind of described was definitely an approach that managers need to take when coaching their sales teams. I kind of want to go into sort of the science and the technology behind ExecVision now. It sounds like based on a couple of things that you said, you're really into how memory in the brain and physiology, how that impacts a seller and their abilities to retain knowledge. I'm curious how you are combining that with AI and technologies to analyze these calls and the type of information and data that these sales managers are receiving that they can then bring back to their sales team.
Yep, that's exactly right. When you set up your topics and your keywords, and the AI analyzes the calls to see the calls that do or do not contain those topics and keywords, and get it to a place where it's really, really easy to get to coachable moments and use those coachable moments to coach and change behavior. What we don't believe, Patrick, is we don't believe that AI will be your future sales coach. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of companies that are chasing that rabbit right now, and the process of human behavior change requires humans. Fundamentally, it is a human behavior change. It's not, based on robots doing it. Now, the AI assists and enables the process and makes it so easy. The AI can certainly tell you exactly what you should listen to, who should be working with who, for example, what skill change needs to happen, what that individual's coaching plan should be, an individual development plan unique to one rep that's different than another rep because of how they learn. AI can help us ascertain things like that based on if the coaching's been working up until that point and what you could adjust about the coaching program. So AI plays a big role in how this can be done very, very easily with very few calories burned, and at the same time get the biggest impact. But fundamentally, when it comes to actually changing behavior, you got to have human beings involved. It makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. That is very cool. So I know that a lot of the stuff that we've discussed talks about sales coaching and maybe the pre-sale up until closing the sale, part of the customer journey. Is that all that ExecVision is supporting on their platform, or are there multiple facets of the customer journey that you guys are supporting?
All of the facets of the customer journey. So, from if there's I'll give you like a software customer journey, and then I can give you another type of one. Software customer journey, you'll have like a sales development rep. You'll have some kind of account executive. SDR just gets the appointment or the opportunity started. The account executive, carries it through the series of calls to close it. Then they hand it off to some sort of a customer success person and or an account manager who manages the relationship and tries to upsell and cross-sell, as well as probably some kind of a support function. All of those people live and die by the phone. They probably have some interactions that happen in person. And oh, by the way, if you go in person, it's really easy to just go and dial into Zoom like we are today, and that recording will automatically go in the system. So you can record if you're in person too. So that's kind of a typical flow. And all those people need coaching. All those people need to improve upon their skill. Now, another workflow that's totally different is a lot of our customers are following a workflow where maybe it's like a B2C organization. So they do consumer debt relief, and or they'd sell cruises or something like a Viking River cruise, something like that, although they're not a customer. So the way that works is there's a ton of advertising that happens, and consumers either call in to some sort of a call center or inside sales center, or they fill out a web form, and then they then call back into the web form. So like On Deck Capital, they're calling web forms a lot. That's one of our customers in New York. Always calling into the web form, and then that individual carries that whole thing throughout, and then they pass it off to like a deal origination team, and they have to approve the credit. And so there's a very different series or kind of customer journey, customer path from the beginning to the end to actually when they realize value and then they renew or they get another loan or whatever it might be. But again, it's the same thing in common. The customer journey is a series of conversations. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
If you think about any business, really the most precious asset you have in a business is your conversations. And the fact that many of these organizations, they don't even record. I mean, forget about all the stuff I'm talking about with software, with conversation intelligence. They don't even freaking record them. So you can't even do basic things like go back and make sure that you heard something correctly. If you missed a note in your notebook, you can't do basic things like share a portion of the call with the customer or share a portion of the call with someone else internally in your company so you can get them up to speed. And forget about coaching and behavior change. I mean, that's like a Monday morning quarterback. Hey, Patrick, remember when you got intercepted? Which one? I had 3 that day, coach. The second one, right? Yeah, I mean, that's preposterous. The fact that in athletics, they would go, well, let's watch the tape. There's the second interception. Let's see what happened. Let's break it down. The fact that we're not doing that in sales and breaking down the plays, breaking down the sales calls is just pathetic. And there's this wonderful book called Flawless Execution by the Navy fighter pilots. And they talk about in the Navy with the fighter pilots, they have a brief, they have their execution, and they have a debrief. So first you brief in advance to prepare for the mission, then you do the mission, and then after the mission, you debrief the mission. And that circle is how you create flawless execution. That's the reason we lose so few people in these missions, and we have the best Navy and the best Army and the best Marines and the best, you name it, Air Force in the world, Coast Guard, every one of them, the best in the world. And the reason we have the best in the world is because they follow these practices. Shame on us in sales. Shame on us as entrepreneurs that we don't do that too, that you go for a huge, big, important meeting, barely prepared. And then after the meeting, you don't even talk about what happened and you didn't even record it. Shame on you.
Yeah, too often. And I can think of back to my days in supporting sales. too often do I feel like we were sitting in sales trainings and the next week we were regurgitating that same information, and it almost seems like none of it was sticking. And that's got to be something that's speaking to the effectiveness of the meetings that they're conducting too. You can't regurgitate it week after week in a sales training meeting. You sure cannot be doing it live in action, right?
Amen to that. And that's why you brief, because if you brief and you say, okay, we're going to apply this lesson from our sales training in this meeting, and here's how we're going to do it, and you do it 2 minutes before, 5 minutes before you walk in the door, and you're fresh, and then you do it in the meeting, and then later on you assess how you did it in the meeting and watch the game tape. That circular process of development is so much more powerful than what you just described.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been a part of a sales team that's actually reviewed calls and specific meetings like that, recording it. Something about seeing yourself and seeing your actions, your mannerisms, how you approach those conversations and those questions can really be insightful. I'm curious, so you guys are integrating with the company's CRM and, Salesforce, whatever it may be, and we're logging calls, we're logging emails, tracking appointments and whatnot. Does ExecVision have the ability to interpret emails as well, or is it all voice and phone?
Good question. Coming very soon. And right now we do have capabilities where people can copy and paste in text. So yeah, you can bring in text and kind of QA the text, if you will, quality assurance control the text.
Yeah.
And in the future, we'll actually be integrated with the email system so that all the email traffic will be available and analyzed by the software.
That's interesting because it almost seems like the voice analyzing and the AI involved with that is a little bit more technologically advanced than interpreting the emails, but you guys started off with voice.
Yeah, and because all the calls are transcribed, you got to do the transcription first. But you're right. Yeah, you're right. But that was where the need was. We saw that the biggest black box in any organization is what's happening inside the conversation.
Yeah.
Less so what's happening inside the email, because people are on emails and they can forward emails and you have a record. Versus if you think about the conversation itself, very rarely do people, I shouldn't say rarely, I mean, some people record it, but it's hard to go back and do much of anything with it. And there's really not a record per se.
Yeah. So two questions to wrap it up. The first one is, how can ExecVision stay ahead of this industry, this sales coaching industry? What are you guys doing, right? Obviously, it sounds like you're getting into the email and text analyzing. What else are you guys doing to kind of stay ahead of everybody else in the industry and be the leaders of sales coaching?
I can't give away all my secrets, Patrick. There's no, but so broadly speaking, this is our point of view, and it's a very strong point of view. Analytics from conversations or analytics from email traffic, analytics for any communication with a customer or a prospect is great. It tells you what happened. Mm-hmm. Now that you know what happened, how are you going to change the rep behavior? Everything that we're building in ExecVision answers that question of how are you going to use that information to change the rep behavior? And then when you do, how are you going to know that it worked?
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, and last question. You've made a lot of sports references, so I got to call you out and ask you, who's going to be in the Super Bowl this year and who's going to take it?
Don't you want to say the Chiefs? You got to think the Pats are going to win. And what the hell? Let's go Chiefs, Rams to be different. How about you?
I like that. That would be an exciting one. I'm personally a Patriots fan, but that Kansas City team scares me. So we'll find out. And by the time that this goes live, we'll already know the outcome. So the audience will know what happened. I feel you might be right, though. Those are good picks.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey, usually I'm wrong, so maybe that'll be good for your Patriots. Patrick, it's been fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, one more thing. I forgot to share this with your audience. So we run this thing called Call Camp. Mm-hmm. Every month. It's free sales training. Think of it as free sales training, where it's just modeled after Gruden quarterback camp, when John Gruden had that show on ESPN where he breaks down the plays. So it's the same exact thing.
Are you
we analyze different sales,
writing plays out for them?
More or less, because we comment on the calls. So we do. Yeah. We literally comment on the calls and break down the calls along the way. So I want that teleprompter. I got to get one, or like whatever they call that thing, the annotation screen on the thing. Yeah. That'd be real cool. But no, it's real calls. We have a topic this time. It's scheduling meetings that stick. It's all about how to schedule meetings that stick. That's the theme. But every month it's a different theme. You know, one month we're going to do a theme on just referrals, and we're just going to focus on how to get referrals and listen to real examples of calls where people do and do not get referrals and do the things the right way and the wrong way.
You said that's Call Camp?
It's called Call Camp, CALLCAMP, Call Camp. If you Google ExecVision Call Camp, also connect with me on LinkedIn. Steve, last name Richard. I've got the Call Camp links all over my LinkedIn. It's easy to find. And again, it's totally free. It's it's one part, service to the community and another part lead generation for us. But I promise it'll be, very, very good use of your time. And considering the fact that it's completely free, it has limitless ROI.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, Steve, thank you for joining us. I appreciate that. And to the viewers, thank you for joining us as well. And we will see you next time.